12 would be a pleasant surprise for me. I believe that BYU will be outside of the top 12. I think they're going to fall at number 13, just behind Boise State. And this is going to cause huge issues because now Boise State, if they were the number 12 team and BYU were the highest ranked Big 12 team at number 13, that means Boise State gets the first round bye and an automatic spot in the Fiesta Bowl, and the Big 12's left out in the cold. But to your point, it's November 19th. It doesn't really matter, but the optics of it are very interesting because that scenario is out there where the Mountain West champion could be in a better position than the Big 12 champion. Do we really think that could happen? That will come into the conversation tonight when I believe BYU is behind Boise State as we look at their resumes side by side. And notable that even with BYU's loss to Kansas, Dave, the Cougars still are 7 spots better in strength of record. They've played a tougher schedule, and they both carry the same record. But we've been joking about it. Boise State has that quality loss on the road at Oregon.
Our
and
loss isn't as good as
that's a better loss, clearly, than BYU losing at home to Kansas.
Yeah, but what Boise State has is what BYU had for a long, long time. Not a case, right? They're in a G5 league. And in the end, the P4s will beat the G5. So if it's Colorado, if it's BYU, if it's Arizona State that wins that Big 12 championship game, compared to whoever Boise plays in the Mountain West championship game, then I think nature will take its course, and along with the 10 SEC teams, there will be a Big 12 team that gets in the mix because of that last bump. That's how the system is set up. The system that BYU's been on the outside looking in on for a long time and mad about, Boise will be mad about. And BYU can be the benefactor if they get to the Big 12 championship game and they win that. I expect them to get a quarterfinal battle, which would mean a first round. But I don't see them backing behind a G5. I don't care who it is.
Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised tonight, and BYU is 1 spot in front of Boise State, and the committee does reward BYU's 2 ranked wins still, and they're not caught up in the loss to Kansas. They're still looking at the whole resume. If they do look at BYU's entire resume, then I believe they should put BYU at number 12. But again, it was such a shocking loss at home that I think the committee, human element, human factor in play here, Dave. They're going to react. There's going to be some knee-jerk reactions, so that's why I'm leaning towards BYU being just behind Boise State.
I'm watching SMU. They're gonna keep moving SMU up, and SMU, the higher they go, BYU went to SMU and beat them at home. So when we're talking about if it comes down to who you actually beat, SMU sitting there and climbing, I think they're going to win the ACC. That will help BYU. That should trump. That's a quality win as opposed to a quality loss against what could be a top 10 team. So we'll see how that goes as well.
Yeah, and we'll just get into the dynamics of where we believe the other Big 12 teams will fall in tonight's top 25. What's crazy is Heather Dinich of ESPN pointed out yesterday that even with BYU, if they come in at number 13 or number 14, they would still be the highest ranked Big 12 team in the moment. And because Boise State would be above BYU in what she is projecting, then BYU is usurping one of those SEC teams. She said, in my projection, BYU would then supplant Tennessee, and Tennessee's left out in the cold, and BYU's in, even though they're outside of the top 12, and the Cougars would be playing a road game at Ohio State on December 20th. I know, these are all hypotheticals.
But they could happen.
It is crazy.
Yeah. Here's the bigger question. Does it matter? Outside of what we're going to talk about on this show tomorrow and what college football will be a buzz about tonight when the poll comes out. But when these rankings come out tonight, does it really matter where they have BYU in the big picture?
It does to the emotional state of a lot of BYU fans.
Here and now, for sure.
But not really. Yeah. Not really. I think we would all do well to just move on to BYU getting into the college football playoff comes down to one thing, and that is winning a Big 12 championship game.
Yeah.
We have entered that realm. The mulligan is gone for BYU, losing to Kansas at home. There's not a realistic at-large path for BYU in the college football playoff anymore. They needed to be undefeated going into a Big 12 championship game to hope for that. I just don't see it, Dave. I don't see a 2-loss BYU team taking the place in an at-large scenario of one of those SEC or Big Ten teams that the committee tend to love so much.
Right, unless they lost Saturday, beat Houston, went to the Big 12, won it. Then they'd have 2 losses, but they'd have the automatic.
But they would have the auto bid. Yeah, sorry. A 2-loss team that
Yeah.
doesn't win the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt, and a lot of teams won't, and some will get the way benefit of the doubt, which is what is maddening. But we all know what it feels like when the BCS released their final poll and BYU was on the outside, despite our this or that. You go back to 2001, they're 12-0, and that's when the BCS released them. 12-0 after beating Mississippi State on the road in the SEC. And they go, nah, you guys aren't going to be good enough for our group. So then we go to Hawaii and get beat. And Staley had broken his ankle against Mississippi State. And that kind of started this whole thing of, hey, what gives? You go back to 96 when they should have been in a big bowl and they got relegated to the Cotton Bowl. And that started the whole process of giving other people a piece of, or at least a seat at the table. But being in the Big 12, you're at the table, and there has to be a benefit, and this is where Brett Yormark earns his cash. He gets Big 12 games on TNT and TBS and all that. That's great. But here is where you're sitting next to the commissioner of the SEC, commissioner of the Big 10, commissioner of the ACC, and you've got to hold your own for your best teams. And we'll see what kind of weight he's got. But it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It creates a lot of fodder and conversation for us, Dave, as we watch these things happen. But circling back to your question, does it really matter where they end up tonight? No. The one thing that could be concerning is if the committee has Boise State, for some reason, 2 spots ahead of a team like BYU. But how much can Boise actually climb? Let's say they play lights out the remainder of the season.
Well, I think they play Wyoming.
They'll dominate Wyoming. They're going to get into the Mountain West Conference Championship game, and it's not going to be against UNLV. It's going to be against Colorado State because of the way the divisions break out. Colorado State is not a great opponent to make a statement against. So even if Boise State finishes 12-1 and are dominant, they're going to need some significant help in front of them with SEC and Big Ten teams losing games that we don't think that they're going to lose.
Hey, look, we feel for them. We've been them.
Yes. Yeah, there's just not much more they can do.
Right.
So maybe 11 or 10 is as high as Boise State climbs, but I am inclined to believe, and you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, that if BYU beats Arizona State or they get into a Big 12 championship game, however they get there, and they have another ranked win in that game compared to Boise State beating Colorado State, I believe the human factor of the committee will be like, no, we need to reward the team that has more ranked wins, and it's a Power 4 conference champion compared to Boise State. So it could get a little weird, a little dicey if Boise's a few spots ahead of BYU. But other than that, I don't think it really matters where they end up ranked tonight.
No, what really matters is they score touchdowns in the red zone on Saturday.
Yeah.
They take care of business there. And then when they play Houston, they score touchdowns in the red zone against Houston.
And BYU has done this, Dave.
And then when you go to Arlington, you score touchdowns in the red zone and beat whoever's there. Now, another thing we'll be looking at is, Kansas State has been a ranked team all year.
Yeah, how many ranked wins will BYU have after the rankings are revealed?
Is Kansas State out tonight? Is it just SMU?
Do you think BYU will still have 2 ranked wins at the end of the night?
It's hard to keep Kansas State in the top 25. I'd like them to be there, but that was a brutal loss at home.
Yes, but it is to Arizona State, who the committee is going to rank tonight, and we'll get to where we think the Sun Devils are going to land in just a moment. The thing that's helping Kansas State is, one, they're number 16. So, yeah, you lose at home. But if Arizona State is a ranked team, then that all of a sudden is like not that bad of a loss because Arizona State's better and they're ranked. And so many teams between 16 and 25 lost last week.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Bad losses. Washington State lost to New Mexico. Congratulations to Bronco Mendenhall.
That's right.
First ranked win for New Mexico since 2003. Like, the tears were flowing in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
Louisville loses a terrible game.
Maybe they hang in to the top 25.
LSU, out. Missouri, probably out.
But Arizona State will be in, so that's a good chance to at least get 3 quasi-top 25.
Yes, so I believe Kansas State is going to they're going to hang on, Dave.
We're going to hear a lot about Arizona State tonight. and they're going to talk about that great win against Kansas State. And no one's going to mention BYU beat Kansas State 38-9. Because it was
a long time ago.
Like when Alabama got beat by Vanderbilt 5 years ago.
But BYU lost to Kansas State. That's what's on top of mind right now. But I believe that BYU will still have 2 ranked wins. Okay, where do you expect the Sun Devils to show up in tonight's poll?
Maybe 20, 25, somewhere in there. I mean, they weren't in at all, so they got to get in. I don't think they come charging in. But we'll see because. I don't know if, Colorado. I'm curious to see where Colorado goes after pounding Utah. Does Colorado jump higher than Arizona jumps in?
So it's interesting. Colorado is 17. There's not a ton of movement that they can make unless you're going to somehow penalize Texas A&M for being on a bye.
Right, and sometimes they do that.
So at best, I think Colorado's at 15. Kansas State I have coming in at 23 or 24. Arizona State, do not be surprised, Dave, again, because so many teams lost last week, including Missouri, Washington State, Louisville, LSU. There's just not a ton of teams coming up from out of the poll to make a statement either other than Arizona State and Illinois, kind of. Don't be surprised to see Arizona State be as high as 19 or 20 in tonight's poll. It was so volatile last week that the committee's like, I don't know, what do we do? Like Arizona State just won at number 16 in dominant fashion, and they were just outside the poll last week. So I think they could come in at 19 or 20.
Possibly. And they've got Arizona after BYU. That's another emotional game. That's their Utah game. That game can go either way. All of a sudden, Arizona's found their offense. So there's no cakewalk. But Arizona State has to win this week. And this would be a high-quality win for them. And I would think after this week is when they would make that big jump.
So what's interesting is you bring up a good point, and we're going to talk about this at length as the week progresses. This Arizona State BYU game being a quote-unquote Big 12 championship elimination game.
And a lot of the national pundits have called it that.
It is more so for Arizona State, believe it or not, than it is for BYU. There are multiple scenarios, heaven forbid, where BYU loses the game in Tempe and the Cougars are still playing in Dallas. Like, more than you would think. Yeah. I was up until 2 a.m. last night going through 75 different scenarios, Doctor Strange style.
And your best ones aren't unreasonable.
No, they're not.
What is reasonable is get your act together and go down there and play good football.
Win the game. That is the simplest.
You can't talk your way into the big games now. You've got to earn your way in. And so here's the one on Saturday. Go win that, and then everyone's going, yeah, okay. That's what they're doing.
BYU is in. If BYU wins on Saturday,
it's
happening. They're going to the Big 12 championship.
It's fun times. Big game.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, huge game. And, again, it has prompted another question we'll discuss later in the week. It's the biggest game since when? I mean, you fill in the blank. Our question of the day today is this. Does it even matter to you where BYU ends up in tonight's college football playoff rankings? Why or why not? At Senior Monkey Face on X answers. It will give us an indication of how the committee sees BYU, so I am interested, but ultimately, I think we know that BYU has to win the last 2 games to have any chance at the playoff. They don't, though. They don't have to win the last. They don't have to win the last 2. It certainly would guarantee BYU's spot in the Big 12 championship game, but telling you what, Dave, this Big 12, the unpredictable
you don't beat Houston
fashion.
At home. You don't deserve to.
No,
that doesn't mean you won't, but you don't get back in.
Telling you, there are 3 or 4 paths.
Go in through the front door.
Where BYU, if they only beat Houston and lose Arizona State, or they could still end up in Dallas.
Yeah, that I can see.
Matt Willerton on Instagram answers, nope, because if BYU wins out, then you go into the playoffs. If not, then you're not.
You're going to the Alamo Bowl. Or
most likely, it's either the Alamo Bowl or you would think the greatest edible mascot bowl game known to man.
Those 2 bowls will be the richest bowls in the history of BYU football if they can get to one of those. That's where we are now compared to where we were in July going, do you see 6 or 7 wins on there? And what is that, back to Shreveport or whatever? Yeah. We're in a different place now. It's a fun place to be, and 1 loss doesn't ruin the place.
Yep. I know.
It just doesn't.
You had room for a mulligan.
This next game all the bigger.
Hashtag BYUS on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Do or does it matter to you where BYU ends up tonight's college football playoff poll? Answer the question.